it's going live.
Some people say the register link is not working anymore. But
Oh, yeah?
yeah, in the commands of Denoli, Julia Denoli. Is that correct?
Julia Denoli? Yes.
I think some people in the comments say the registration link is not working anymore, but
It's the same. Well, we live anyway. So, hey, let's go. Yes. People will join. Let me just send her the link and you don't need to register anymore. It's live anyway. Hello and welcome everyone to our fourth SOLA event. Just in a nutshell, SOLA is a collective focused on content and events for engineers and researchers around AI topics. My name is Kevin. I'm a former entrepreneur and I turned VC 10 years ago. I created a fund called a seed fund called Galleon.exe. I run SOLA alongside Oriane and Willie and Anastasia and Julia from Entrepreneurs First as well. Since we call ourselves, sorry, yeah, you're actually, this is us. And we have a research committee because we are called state of the art. So obviously we need people to know exactly what we are talking about. And today I'm delighted to actually have Professor Dr. Ivan Shamchikov. He's the co-founder of Pleias. He's also having a podcast and a YouTube channel. I'm actually sharing this to you right here, so you can actually join his Substack and his YouTube channel. And I guess that I have to say, Mr. Ivan, the floor is yours.
thank you very much, Kevin, for having me. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I just wanted to double check if I share this link on the studio on my LinkedIn, will it be easy for people to enter, Kevin? Like, can they just join from the link or not? If not, just give me the link to invite people because I think some more people want to jump on. Nevertheless, let's move to why we are here today. What do we want to discuss? So I'm a co-founder of Pleias, where we build open source, fully open source models, because we fundamentally believe that not only the weights should be public, but also the training loop and the data, because that prevents a lot of the issues on the data integrity side. And today I'll talk about benchmarks, why your evals are probably off. We all know what benchmarks are. We all use them in daily life, but unfortunately, things are a bit more complicated than we think. And quite often, I think each of you who ever used an LLM in production has noticed that somehow, despite the best promises of all these benchmark papers or all these evals that you see publicly available, your LLM is not delivering what you expect it to. So today we'll discuss some of the research results that we got in THWS, that's the university in Germany where I'm a research professor, as well as some of the experience that we had in Pleias. I can briefly tell about who I am. So I did my PhD in Germany in Brandenburg, and I had 2 masters, one from St. Petersburg University, Russia, one from Halmstad University, Sweden. I also worked in several academic institutions, including Max Planck Society and Lisbon School of Economics and Management. And I also worked for several industrial companies, Yandex, Abby, Toloka, doing basically things relevant to machine learning and AI. And recently, I joined THWS as a professor and co-founded Pleias as a chief technical officer. And since basically last quarter, maybe 4 months ago, we entered in a very strange world. And the world we live in now is basically the world where a US nonprofit sells closed models to the whole world, while a hedge fund from China actually publish state-of-the-art open source, or at least open weights model. And that's quite interesting because, well, words have meaning. And even the announcement of DeepSeek actually spawned a huge discussion around what do we evaluate when we evaluate LLMs? Because we all track our progress. I mean, I can here ask the audience, I guess, put a plus in the chat if you use some public benchmarks to basically be aware of the LLM progress. Can you put a plus if you do that? And if you know a specific benchmark that you particularly look at, share it on the chat as well. That will be very helpful because it will also allow me to understand a bit better the audience. Okay, so Nikita, Arnaud, Svetlana, they are all sharing pluses. Maybe some specific names. What are you guys using in production? Maybe examples of the benchmarks you go for. Huh? Okay, we got some answers. Private business related benchmarks. So I think that's a good answer. And I guess the reason why it is a good answer will be covered in this talk today, hopefully. So generally, on one hand side, if you look at the public benchmarks, you might have this feeling of LLMs eat up the world, right? So famously, at some point, Andrew Karpathy had this thesis that deep learning is eating software, right? Because some things that were done by the software could now be done by the deep learning end to end. And I think one of the famous examples that he was using was basically self-driving in Tesla, where at first they tried to work with the compressed images from the camera, and then they figured out that in fact, if they just take a raw signal from the matrix of the camera and plug it into a deep learning model, it will give them better results than this pre-processed compressed image. And so this trend of like LLMs eat the world is documented really, really nicely in this repo that I want to share with you. It's called Killed by LLM. This is basically the list of the benchmarks on which current LLMs are basically saturated. And so starting, for example, from Sonnet or from O1 or from O3, you get next to 90% performance. And so the benchmark doesn't work as a distinguishing thing, as a tool that allows you basically to establish what the hell is going on. Why do you use that or not? The problem with this type of activities, though, is that you kind of get a very skewed signal. And the reason for this, I think the next image sums up really well. This is the photo of a more efficient way to store tennis balls. And on the benchmarks of tennis ball storage efficiency, the right bottle will clearly outperform the left one. The problem is that the balls that you store now are not playable. You cannot use this thing to play tennis. And that's literally what happens with a lot of the benchmarks. And today I want to show you what are potential problems in rather popular benchmarks used for evaluation, so that hopefully by the end of this talk, you have a gut feeling of like, if I want to test my model in production, what should I actually do to be sure that this thing doesn't happen to me? Yeah. So that's the overall motivation for what we want to discuss. And the first thing I want to present is a recent preprint that we had with my colleagues in THWS. It's called What the HellaSwag because it's based on this very popular benchmark called HellaSwag. So who knows this benchmark? Once again, put a plus in the chat if you used it and some works of you. I want to sample the room again. And correctly, Kevin says that if you have some questions through the talk, just drop them in the chat or put them in the Q&A session. So this is a joint work with my PhD student Pavel Chizhov, Mathieu Ney, and Pierre-Carl Langlais. Both, all of us are involved with Pleias. And HellaSwag is a very popular benchmark for common sense reasoning. And common sense reasoning sounds like good things to have, right? Like you want your model to be reasonably well performing on common sense. Why? Well, because a lot of the LLM applications you guys use are probably either RAG relevant or some form of informational personal assistant. So you quite often use LLM to fetch some data or to stitch several pieces of data together so it becomes a viable answer. So you want to have some common sense capabilities. Now, the first thing we found once we started working with this benchmark is that once you look at the benchmark, it's full of problems. So this is just an example about like the benchmark consists of different activities. and basically some potential answers that correctly extend the description of the situation. And here we just listed some grammatical errors, some typos, some nonsense, because just this thing is not English. And we also showed what we'll do later on today. We basically show the part of the prompt that we believe could be removed, and still the model will correctly answer to the question. That's a spoiler alert, but you'll be fine. So this is a random question, and according to our labeling, a huge portion of the questions in the benchmark are actually faulty in multiple ways. Moreover, it's not only our evaluation, this is evaluation of an LLM itself. So we just used Claude, latest version of Claude, and asked it to check for nonsense in the prompt and nonsense in the correct option. So when the correct option that's designated as a right answer is actually not sensical, or some nonsense in incorrect options. And Claude out of the box overall says that 5% of the prompts don't make sense, and 85% of the wrong answers don't make sense, right? Which is a little bit disturbing. Yes, it's labeling by an LLM, but it's a really potent LLM. And the problem is that once your 85% of the answers are nonsensical, then the benchmark that you claim is common sense benchmark becomes basically a benchmark where you need to filter out complete nonsense and end up with one answer that kind of makes sense. Now, internally, this benchmark actually has two halves. I don't want to go into those details here, but if you go to the paper, the preprint is available online. You can get the details as well. The point here is that out of the box, a relatively capable LLM applied to a given benchmark that's quite popular and is used a lot in reports about new LLMs, actually tells that a considerable portion of this benchmark is nonsensical and has grammatical problems and problems with the answers and the questions. And this is disturbing on so many levels, including the fact that, like, what does it mean then that your model is better on this benchmark than the other model? Is it better on the sensible questions, or is it better because it guessed correctly the nonsensical answers? That's already a problem, and we'll try to evaluate and explain what do we mean about it. So the first step, the first idea that we had, basically could be summarized in this meme. Yeah, so my LLM knows correct answers 80% of the time, and then the lady's asking basically, but the answers depend on the questions, right? And it turns out that they don't. It turns out that for a huge portion of questions, you can completely remove the prompt. So coming back to this slide, look, this is the prompt that kind of describes the situation in a gym, and you expect your common sense reasoning LLM to choose the correct answer about the man's behavior. So what we did, we threw away this description that we marked with gray completely away. We just removed the prompt, and we say this is zero prompt. Yeah, and we created those zero prompts, and then we measured the performance of the model on the on the normal prompt and on the zero prompt, and we found out that it drops, but it doesn't drop a lot. Yeah, so like here, the zero prompt scenario is basically having this diagonal lines, and the same color but without the diagonal lines is the full prompt. So you see, for example, that Quen with the prompt gets 85% of the benchmark right, and without the prompt it drops 20%, but it still gets a large portion of the benchmark correctly. Yeah, which means that almost for every model, out of the box, the starting prompt doesn't matter. Out of the box, I can just say, man, give 4 answers, and LLM picks the correct answer. And Nikita knows what it means, and the damn commentary is something that I really want to put on the screen, because that's the right reaction that we had immediately once we saw that result. Yeah. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, we need to look into this drop according to the model and try to figure out why does it happen, because there could be multiple reasons why does it happen. And second of all, let's quantify this drop a little bit more. So here is our quantification of this prompt across several models. So here we involved like a bunch of different models of different sizes, starting from Qwen, finishing with DeepSeek. And here is the percentage of questions for which zero prompt is giving the same answer, depending on the number of models, right? So, and it turns out that 18% of the benchmark are so obsolete that 10 models guess this 18% of the benchmark without the prompt. Yeah. So like every model just knows by heart 20% of your benchmark, and you still claim that your benchmark is kind of like good to evaluate common sense reasoning. Good luck with that. Now, Eldar is basically giving us a next very interesting question. Eldar is asking, is it choosing just maximum perplexity a good option? And let's delve into that because that's actually very, very sensible way of thinking about it. And I really love this next slide that summarizes it. So apparently, maybe the benchmark looks like this for the model. So the model gets some nonsensical question that it ignores, and then it gets a bunch of options. And out of these options, the model is basically just choosing a more complex one. Because here, obviously, and let's check how many people are listening, which answer is more complex, A, B, C, or D? Your guess is in the comments, please. Yeah. So while you're thinking about it, this is literally the Eldar suggestion, right? So maximum perplexity will be a proxy of entropy, right? And entropy is basically the measure of complexity. Yeah. So correctly, some people benchmarked really well, and both Eldar and Nikita provide us with the correct answer. It's C. So entropy of this image would be much higher than the entropy of the other four, of the other three. And so maybe that's what the model is looking at. So maybe the model is really ignoring our prompts. It's ignoring the answers. It's just like, okay, human, you want to test me if I can choose a more complex answer out of the four you give. And so if I choose the complex answer, I'll just get it right. And apparently, this is literally what happens part of the time. Moreover, the proxy metric could be even simpler. What would be the most simple metric of the quality of the answer, of the complexity of the answer? Any guesses in the comments? So if I'm benchmarking an LLM, what would be a proxy for LLM answer complexity? So Eldar proposed perplexity. Would there be a simpler proxy? Yes, length. Indeed. OMG. OMG length. That's the command that I also want to put on the screen, because that's the right command. And it's a slam dunk, my ladies and my gentlemen. So this is mean log likelihood, and this is text length. And we basically show that, you know, just guessing the longer answer apparently helps you to optimize on HellaSwag. And these are the accuracies of the models. So in terms of the evaluation of generation and log likelihood. And basically, we did two things. We, on the left side, when it's just accuracy, we report our HellaSwag answers. And when it's all bad, we basically have no good answer, but we pick the longer one as the correct one. So we remove the good answer, and we ask the model to choose from the bad ones, and we mark up the longer one as the correct one. And boom, the models are very good in picking the longer answer, even when the right one is missing, which is kind of opposite what you mean or I mean when I'm talking about common sense, because that's literally nonsensical in terms of common sense. So Nikita correctly says that it reminds him of the story when LLM eval harness used first token probability for the signal choice answer, basically ignoring the output. Indeed, that's the case, and that's part of the story, right? So LLMs don't reason like people, and we need to be very careful when we anthropomorphize them, because what they look for are not what we look for. And that helps, and that screws our benchmarks a lot. So in this paper, we also propose something we call golden swag, where we literally control for the length, and we literally try to filter out the nonsensical examples. And we show that some models, even on the golden swag, remain to be really good in zero prompt. And I really am out of my wits what could explain that other than leakage, because that's the last factor, right? So maybe once we control for the answer complexity, once we removed this issue with the length, once we removed the nonsensical questions, what we're left with are just the questions for which LLMs have memorized the answers, because maybe those questions happen to be in the training data. Yeah. And here we see that some models like Pythia or Pleias or DeepSeek are actually dropping significantly on the golden set, whereas some models like Quen or Olmo actually remember a lot from the zero shot prompting. Maybe there's something else. I'm actually really open to your suggestions. If you have ideas on what could it be, reach out to me. The preprint is an archive, but it's a work in progress as always. So very short TLDR. There are validity issues in very popular benchmark, and I'm pretty sure that similar validity issues are across the board. Starting with just the fact that the questions themselves might be faulty. It could be explained with the fact that, like, yeah, you want to benchmark your LLMs on some relevant data, and users might mistype, so your LLMs need to be robust to that. But I'm pretty sure that the problem with this benchmark is not about that. And the zero prompt finding is a big and interesting test. So if you want to know if your benchmark is doing what you think it's doing, a very easy suggestion would be, how about you do the zero prompt? Would the answers significantly drop if you remove the prompts? It's a very simple rule of thumb, because if they don't, then probably your benchmark is not measuring what you think it does. Yeah. And then finally, common sense reasoning is important, but we actually don't have good benchmarks to measure it on. Okay. Now, the next question would be, how did we end up here? I mean, it's not that people who work on LLMs are dumb. I mean, some of them are smart. I'm dumb, but some people are. I'm pretty sure. I believe in humanity. So how did we end up in a situation where such things even happen? And for this, I really love this example from Sketch Planations. I actually use it for my statistics course. So here is the teacher presenting the results of the survey, asking people, do you like to respond to surveys? And 99% of the people say they do. And the problem is, of course, that people who don't like responding to surveys, they ignore the survey altogether. My favorite example of this sampling bias is the question about AI safety that's on Wikipedia AI safety page. So if you Google AI safety and you go to Wikipedia page, you'll find the following data. And we can actually try to do it live right now. I know that you shouldn't, I guess, but I will nevertheless. So if you go to this page right now, you'll see the AI safety page. And if you scroll at some point, you'll see the statistics about the risks of the models. And in particular, you say this: in a 22 survey on the natural language processing community, 37% agreed or weakly agreed with the fact that LLMs are dangerous. Here is the stat. And so I remember it pretty vividly because I was the participant of this survey that didn't fill up the survey. So I got the survey from EMNLP conference organizers. This was a survey done by the AI safety workshop organizers. And they got 37% of the answers that, oh, LLMs are dangerous, but their completion rate was below 20%. So out of everybody who actually was in the conference, only 1/5 completed the survey. And out of those people, less than half actually said that LLMs are dangerous. But that didn't prevent them to publish these results on Wikipedia. So selection bias is a huge problem anywhere we go in statistics. And to some extent, benchmarks are this example of selection bias. It's very similar to the story about the guy who's looking for keys under the lantern, not because he lost the keys under the lantern, but because the light is there, so he can see things, right? So benchmarks historically were developed by the community based on this idea. Okay, I know this field, I'll create a benchmark in it. Or I'm working on this topic, I need some benchmark, I'll create it on it. So we used to live in a world where we have a lot of benchmarks for various things and very limited number of models that could be evaluated across the board. We had some models for one benchmarks, and then we're not relevant for the other. And then relatively recently, the paradigm shifted. And there is another paper that I developed with my former PhD student, Max, and it's called Vygotsky distance. And the thing is that we are used to this idea that we evaluate models using benchmarks. And 2 years ago, it occurred to us that maybe we need to flip the game, because now we have a lot of models that could be applied to benchmarks across the board. And if we want to be sure that the benchmark is actually useful, we probably can flip the board and instead use models to evaluate benchmarks. And we basically introduced this concept, we called it Vygotsky distance. We basically asked the question, can we assign some score to the benchmarks? And based on the score, can we judge if the benchmark is actually evaluating something new or not? And we basically came up with a very open mind to it. We said the score should be abstract enough so we don't have to worry about normalizing it. It should be as general as possible, so it's applicable across the board, no matter what's the field, no matter what's the benchmark. And it should be informative. And then we came up with a name for this score. We called it Vygotsky distance after Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky. He was like one of the genius of education. He came up with this concept of student-centered learning. He also came up with this concept of zone of proximal development. Basically, I'm butchering it, but like basically he noticed that we talk to each other in a more complex language than the language we talk to our kids. And yet we talk to the kids in a language that's more complex than the kids can use with each other, right? So he found that like instinctually we humans adapt to the learner, trying to evaluate the capacity of the learner and provide the learner with the tasks that are hard for the learner, but are manageable. Right? And so he came up with this zone of proximal development. And we thought that this idea of using learners to evaluate benchmarks is very Vygotskyan in its sense. So we introduced this concept of Vygotsky distance, and it's a very simple concept. The concept is just like this. If I have a set of models, let's say I have 10 all-purpose models. I have Qwen, I have Claude, I have GPT, I have different letters behind them, I have DeepSeek, I have Mistral, I have Pleias, I have whatever. I list this set of models, and I take my benchmarks, and I rank my models on it. On this benchmark, Claude 3.7 wins. And on this benchmark, maybe GPT-4 wins. And on this one, somebody else wins. And I get a ranking. And the cool thing about ranking is that it's very abstract. It's just the order. And another cool thing about it is that if I have two benchmarks on which my rankings are the same, then I could say that one benchmark is not informative as long as I have the other, right? Just because the ranking is the same, right? So if I introduce a new benchmark and the ranking on it does reproduce the ranking on some other benchmark, I can say that they are similar in terms of the Vygotsky distance. And that's a very simple idea. And using it, you can actually find very interesting things in the known benchmarks. This is an example of the glue benchmark. So these are different tasks within one benchmark. It's obsolete, it's very old, but a lot of people who do NLP know it. And what you find out is that in terms of the Vygotsky distance, some of the tasks that seem to be similar for humans, like natural language inference, the blue dots here are natural language inference tasks. And humans think that this task, this task, this task, all these 5 blue dots are very similar. But for LLMs, they're relatively far apart. The bigger is the number on the edge, the bigger is the Vygotsky distance from the tasks. Yeah. So intuitively, we as humans look at this and like, okay, this is all natural language inference. But in reality, for models, they clearly do something different with one task out of the 5. Similarly, with the superglue, we see similar structure that once again, Q&A, blue dots here. There are 2 types of Q&A questions that seem to be relatively close to each other, but relatively far apart within the whole benchmark. And so we came up with this weird but rather simple idea that we actually show in the paper that most of the benchmarks are 40% redundant. So you can throw 40% of the benchmark away and still correctly predict the ranking of the models. But the cool thing here is that now when we create a new benchmark, for example, like the one that Nikita is using in production, like special private business related benchmark, you can see whether the ranking of the models on your benchmark differs from the ranking on the open ones. And if it doesn't, your benchmark is redundant to a large extent because it's not introducing new information to the system. Yeah. Now, we're heading to the finishing part of this talk, and I want to make a fun detour because I feel that some people are already asleep. By the way, if you're asleep, fall on the keyboard and leave a nonsensical message in the chat so we know that you actually completely switched off. The session is recorded and will be available online, Vivian, I hope. I'm not sure about it being available online, but it seems to be recorded, right, Kevin? We got this question from Vivian here. No idea. Okay, so it's time for a fan detour. So LLM and empathy. And I think it's a hot topic. We already mentioned AI safety here, so I want to introduce it with my favorite comic. And I don't know who's the author. So if you know the author, please let me know so I can reference it in my slides. So here is the robot who says eradication of humanity, initialization. And then the scientist who says, oh, you need more empathy. Let me just add some. And then the robot says, my deepest condolences in these difficult times. Eradication progress 20%. So I think people actually care a lot for empathy for a variety of reasons, including AI safety. But I think for a lot of applied things, you care for empathy from a very, very simple practical perspective. And that is, if you build a bot that talks to your users, you want your bot to project certain personality. And this is the third result that I want to present today. This one was done with some of my former colleagues and with one of the students I supervised. It's called LLMs Simulate Big 5 Personality Traits. And so Big 5 is this psychological test that claims to estimate human personalities. And what is important about Big 5 is that it's based on a big portion of clinical research that is very NLP driven. Because historically, people asked, the psychologists asked people to self-describe how they feel about themselves, who they are. And then they applied factor analysis to certain words in the text that they used. And the factor analysis was giving them 5 axes. That's how we end up with Big 5. And those axes were conscientiousness. So like, do you like order? Are you dutiful? Are you achievement oriented? Like, for example, people who attend the webinar at 7 p.m. on Monday here are disproportionately conscientious. Probably everybody on this call is high on conscientiousness in comparison with the general population. Agreeableness, whether you're trustworthy, where you're altruistic, where you are modest, tender, easy to negotiate with. Neuroticism, I don't need to explain to a bunch of engineers what neuroticism is. Openness, how open you are to fantasy aesthetics, new experiences. Extroversion, how open you are to different people. Those are like 5 factors on each of those you can be high or low. Yeah. And we did the following thing. Later on, methodologically, psychologists actually validated this factor analysis, and they also created a questionnaire where you can ask people to just give answers from 5 to 1. And then you sum up those answers and you get the estimate of this Big 5 personality. And then we tried to apply this questionnaire to LLMs. And out of the box, we got that Mistral and GPT-4 have profile that's distinctly different from Llama. So out of the box, Llama simulates a personality that's higher in neuroticism than Mistral or GPT-4. And it's actually considerably lower on agreeableness and conscientiousness than GPT-4 and Mistral. And once you see this result, probably you can explain the phenomenon that each of you had. Have you ever tried to ask LLM something and it gives you a wrong answer? and you tell it the answer is wrong, what happens then? Well, most of the time, at least GPT would just acknowledge that, oh, I'm sorry, my bad. I'm sorry. Actually, 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. Exactly. Nikita is saying, I'm sorry. And I can put it on the screen. That's what's happening, right? So LLMs are actually highly agreeable, at least both Mistral and GPT. And out of the box, they say, yeah, you do you, girl. I'm fine. And of course, that's probably a really good behavior from a personal assistant. Now imagine you're building a startup that's a fitness coach. Do you want that from a fitness coach? Probably not. From a fitness coach, you actually want to have lower agreeableness and high conscientiousness. And that's not what you get out of the box for some of the systems. Yeah. Now, let's say openness to experience. Those things are quite neutral. Now, if you're building some explorative thing where you try to, discovery mode, right? So if you try to brainstorm ideas with LLMs, probably you found out that LLMs can provide cool ideas, either if you actually reference people that you personally have affinity with and you think, oh, this person has cool ideas. So how about you generate me the ideas like, I don't know, like Elon Musk has, right? And then sometimes it resembles what you're looking for. But generally speaking, openness to experience out of the box is not necessarily great with LLMs. And that's also a problem if you're building a discovery application. Even if you talk about food, right? Let's say you're building a personal recipe advisor. Once again, optimizing your nutritional health, but also exploring new things. So you want actually openness to experience to be high, but agreeableness still need to be relatively low because, chocolate chip cookie is not for you today, yeah? Right? And the answer, oh, I'm sorry, of course you can have one, is maybe not what you want. So with this result, we just show that there is a lot of things you can do in this area, and it's a work in progress. We actually experiment with a range of what is the range of personalities you can simulate out of the box with LLMs and what those personalities are. And I wanted to have this detour closer to the end of my talk as an example of this, I believe, is a type of evaluation that matters a lot for very practical, down-to-earth, startup-relevant applications. Because use cases are pretty clear. And yet, this is not the evaluation that you see on a bunch of benchmarks collected across the board. And that in itself is actually a problem because I believe that on many levels, we are actually past the border of LLMs need to perform 95% of the tasks on this benchmark correctly so that I implement them. People literally talk about something they call vibe check because we're living in the age of the vibe. And for example, this Big Five evaluation is actually a very good proxy of vibe check on certain applied issues. And I think people don't talk nearly enough about it. There is a question from Nikita that I want to share. I wonder if GPT and Mistral share Big Five because someone trained on someone else's outputs or they targeted the same audience of LM Arena. That's a great question. And I think we should ask it for the people that develop the models. But I think the fact that we even consider these questions is very important because business-wise, those things matter. If you have a personal coach that's actually agreeable, it's not a great business. Now, let me wrap up by the end of this talk and we dive into questions. So benchmarking LLMs in the wild is actually much harder than just plugging it into the variety of the benchmarks you already have. First, you need a golden set that human looked into. No excuses. And I think here somebody in the chat already mentioned that what they use internally is actually a human labeled data set, right? Second, you need overlaps because humans themselves are prone to errors. So golden data set is only golden when people looked at it twice or three times and they agree on what they see. Yeah, especially once it gets tricky. Now, you need to define use case relevant metrics and you have to add redundancy because if you claim that your model needs to be common sense reasoner, it's not enough just to have one benchmark on common sense. It might be that it's a HellaSwag type of benchmark and you might be quite off in your evals, especially when we're talking about percentage points, right? A lot of business decisions are based on 5 percentage points difference between two models. And then you're like, okay, that might cost me a few cents more on the dollar, but 5 percentage points, maybe that's important. It's only important if your metric is redundant and you can actually see that on various benchmarks, those 5 percentage points are there. If they're not, it's probably noise and you just can go with the cheaper version anyway. Yeah, it will just protect your margins. Now, you have to have a feedback loop, but you have to pay attention, and it's much harder than you think because the feedback loop basically prones you to mode collapse. And I think that's something that we didn't even touch in this discussion, other than the moment when I showed you that even when we control for the length and complexity of the answer, and even if we remove the nonsensical questions, we still have some models that basically memorize the data because the data leaked into training. And once you include some type of a data wheel in your product and you do continuous post-training, you might occur in a very bad place pretty soon. And I think even bigger labs do it, right? So there's a lot of rumors about how introduction of RL to some models actually makes them worse on so many sides of the story, yeah? And then finally, whenever you work with whatever metric, whatever model, remember that LLMs are fine-tuned to weird metrics out of the box. We don't know for a large portion of these models what are the benchmarks on which their creators fine-tune them for. And you just need to keep it in mind because that can be backstabbing for your business use case. So assume that they are not only not fine-tuned for use case, but maybe they're adversarial to it to some extent, especially if it's a sensitive case, especially if it's safety relevant, especially if it's a churn relevant, right? If you believe that the model might actually be fine-tuned to the behavior that churns your customer, check it not twice, but 4 times, because that's actually really hurting your bottom line. Now, we'll move on to the discussion, but I just want to share a great piece of content. So recently, apparently, community was starting publishing different AI pipelines, and our CTO, Pierre Carl, recently published his own AI pipeline where he believes that intelligence will peak in 2028 when finally we'll solve parsing of PDFs, and then we'll only go downhill from there. Please, I just highly recommend his blog. It's a high-level LLM satire, and I think if you enjoyed this talk, you'll definitely enjoy the blog with follow-up infos. Thank you very much. I think with this, I can stop sharing and maybe on to questions.
Yes, maybe let's switch to questions. So let me remove this and maybe like this, it's better. Oh, cool. I was about to post it. And
thank you, Arnold.
Let me remind you that Mr. Ivan has a YouTube channel and a Substack too.
But that's going to change this year. I'm working on 10 episodes of AI and ethics related issues. And my copy is in English. My Substack is in English. And I'm writing there a lot about education and AI in their mixedly. So please subscribe. I'll be happy if you stay in touch there.
So I think we had a question from Victoria at the very beginning. Let me put it here.
What can be the strategy to evaluate LLM-based products in pharma healthcare domains? Great question. We actually had some projects in this direction. So I guess first, pharma and healthcare would be 2 very different issues and 2 very different domains. So let's start with pharma. In the area of organic chemistry, you now have several directions where people, like AlphaFold famously, where people actually work on new substances and try to benchmark the LLM applicability. Outside of the open domain, there are actually very few data sources available because most of the pharma companies don't publish their data for obvious reasons. They believe that they can capitalize on it. If you don't have the data in the pharma area, I guess your only viable way forward is either to partner with such a company or to push some open innovation efforts in this direction, citizen science efforts. I think the only potential alternative might be publishers, scientific publishers, who might have some chemistry data for you, so you can benchmark your models on it. But I think pharma is actually very difficult. And if we speak about billionaires that can make a lot of common good with like relatively little investment, I believe that buying a pharma company and open sourcing their data sets might be a very easy way to do good in this world. So if any billionaire is listening, please consider the opportunity. Now, regarding healthcare, this is a bit easier because medical institutions, especially in Europe, are very actively pushing in the direction of creating of those benchmarks. I highly recommend you to have a look at for example, in EPFL, there is Anna Hartley and their model Meditron. So let me share the model. So it was created by the EPFL lab. Aldar, once you become a billionaire, remember my advice. It all started here on Soda webinar. It all started there. All right. So you need to be true to your roots. But in all seriousness, so EPFL, for example, is one of the examples of a labs that works a lot on open sourcing healthcare data and healthcare models. And what is very interesting here specifically are developing markets, because in Africa, for example, the implementations of LLM in healthcare are actually much easier than in EU, because on one hand side, there's regulation is not there. On the other hand side, the number of medical professionals and the coverage of the insurance is much lower. So literally implementing LLM in a lot of cases literally saves lives, years of lives for people, and costs like fraction of the costs than any other solution. So I think this combination of like European open data initiatives and global outreach, especially to the developing world, is a very interesting combo where a lot of very interesting things happen in the healthcare domain. Yeah, so go to EPFL lab that behind Meditron, start from there, look for benchmarks in this direction using the data they provide. Yeah.
Is there any more question?
I think we had one more. I think at some point.
Okay.
Yeah, so Nikita at some point had a comment that I think is quite interesting that I wanted to discuss.
Okay.
He says, we evaluate against people using inter-rater reliability, and then when LLMs are aligned with people, we use LLMs only. So that's a very interesting approach that I believe, so I recommend, first of all, because it's cheaper in terms of like return on investment. So you basically try to be sure that your LLMs are not off with respect to people. And once you are sure about it, you just stick with LLM because it's much cheaper and faster. That's great, but it doesn't allow you to deal with data shifts. So it's only a good idea as long as you can be sure that data shifts in your user base are not happening. If they do, you either need to reevaluate the pipeline on a regular basis, or you need to try to deal with this data shift on the level of LLMs, which is technically much harder, right? But you need to be aware about this thing. So if your distribution of clients doesn't change, that works. But for most of the startups, for example, that's not the case, because if you happen to hit the right node and you enjoy exponential growth, then it's very probable that the distribution of your clients is actually changing significantly, because you start with the early adopters that are very peculiar, and you align your evaluation pipeline to the people that are to some extent far more special and far less representative of your median client than what happens once you actually start to have the exponential growth. I mean, of course, as long as you have exponential growth, this is probably the least of your problems, and we all wish you luck. And as long as you are on this track, more power to you. But still, be careful about it, especially once you hit this curve. You need to reevaluate this approach at least once, or I don't know, on a quarterly basis if you grow really fast. And then I think there was another comment. I think, yes. So at some point, Elder was saying that reiterating on length, I've heard a rumor that chat completion models trained via DPO, the human labeler would cheat and not read the whole answer, just choose the longer one because it seems smarter. Now you believe this rumor more? Yeah, actually, first, there are papers in this direction that are showing that this preference for longer answers is an internal flaw of reinforcement learning pipelines quite often. Second of all, this general interplay between the human labelers and the model behavior is something that's absolutely fascinating. And here I just want um, to present you with one anecdotal story that I believe is wonderful and it would be a very good ending point of the discussion. So famously, if you Google for usage of the word delve in scientific papers, you see that it exponentially took off with the ChatGPT. And the reason for it is that ChatGPT is using delve, D-E-L-V-E, far more often than an average native speaker of English in the United States or UK. And some people were even like smart about it, saying that, you know, now I can see if this text is generated because there's delve there and blah, blah, blah. Well, how did it end up there? So speculatively, it ended up there because the data labelers that OpenAI paid for to label the answers were, to a large extent, based in Africa, specifically Nigeria, where, well, it turns out that in the Nigerian English language, delve is actually a very popular word. That's it's like people use it. It's a frequently used word, and it's associated with a more sophisticated answer. So Nigerian labelers prefer delve over other words. And I think it's an amazing story of technological decolonization because it's pretty clear now that delve is re-entering English language thanks to Nigerian culture, right? Inadvertently, it's here to stay now. No matter how hard we try to say that it's only AI that uses it, come on, we all know it's going to stay. And that's a really cool example of this feedback loop that backfired in a very unpredictable way. And it's just one of the few that are unfolding as we speak, right? And so I think this preference for longer answers might be another example. The preference for certain wording, another example. This obsessive wish to provide you with the bullet points, right? Have you noticed that like LLMs are obsessive about lists, right? If you generally give a more or less complex task to an out-of-the-box, modern, bigger LLM, they will definitely end up with a list. And that obsessiveness might also be the reason because, like, culturally, maybe the data labelers believe that the listed structured output is easier to read, so they tend to value higher than non-listed one. Is it always good? No idea. But that's, I think, another example. Yeah, bullet points and more emojis now, says Victoria. Yeah. So these are examples that are beginning to unfold. And as the data for the training gets polluted with the generative content, we are now entering the epoch of mode collapse that happens because we cannot filter the generated content from the authentic one. And that's another very interesting story. The deterioration of the model due to that is something that we are facing right now. And it's a completely different issue for a completely different talk that I hopefully at some point will give here.
Maybe let's the next questions. Do you know any benchmarks related to fun and humor? Or
Yes.
at least interesting ones that are not just Q&A. This was the second part.
So yes, I do. So first of all, humor is a very difficult problem because it's interculturally difficult. It's also subjective. We actually tried to collect the data set of humor that will be clean. That's one of the tasks that we had. I can share a preprint on it, but it's highly subjective. So I share a preprint in the chat, but you can look for more. So this one is just like one-liners that we also filtered to try to make it clean, so it's like PG, oriented for family audiences. Now Cedric is going with the question: do you know some benchmarks dedicated for robotics applications? So here, unfortunately, I have to say no. I'm not a roboticist. I have an amazing colleague here, Pascal Meissner. I can ask him for some benchmarking for robotics and can share you as a follow-up info, maybe with some links. I can send them to Kevin maybe this week, and you can explore them later on. Stay in touch with Kevin, and I think I'll provide you with some more infos. What is my approach to cool paper search and analysis related to benchmarks? There's so much information noise around. Well, I use Perplexity Deep Research Pro version. Does really good job. No product placement intended. I actually pay for the product. I like it a lot. In all honesty, I do use spaces of Perplexity for different topics and do use deep research for them. I also try to have some agents monitoring certain topics once I'm interested in them and giving me summary, and then going deeper if I believe that summary is not enough, or if I think that I need to get deeper, right? So famously, at some point, I think it was the rule that coined by some of the major computer science figures. I don't remember exactly, but there is the saying that like, if you don't understand what the paper is about based on the headline of the paper, you don't need to read it. And if you do understand what is it about completely after reading the headline and the abstract, you also don't need to read it. So there is this benchmark of complexity. Like, it should be pretty clear what is it about based on the headline only. If it's not, it's probably a badly written paper. You won't benefit much. But if after reading abstract, it's completely clear what's going to happen there, probably that's what's happening there, and you don't need to read the full paper. You're done. Move on. It's not going to be exciting. So you want to have certain level of ambiguity after finishing the abstract, but you don't want to have completely no clue after finishing the headline. I guess this would be my rules of thumb. Now, another question Svetlana is asking, I recently noticed the bigger the model, the lazier it. For example, in generation test code, they tend to fake answers rather than think more. Is it a weakness in some other things, or is it the generalization of human experience? That I cannot tell, but I do think that it sounds a lot like a generalization of human experience. I mean, it tells, like, once you study LLMs, it tells you way more about us than about them. And then Nikita is asking if there are any announcements or releases to expect from Pleias soon. Well, that's a difficult one. I guess I shouldn't use this platform for those, but yes, follow us on social media. We do have. We've been cooking. Let's put it this way.
Please do. If you want to talk about it, please do.
I think so. We currently basically looking for our product market fit, and we have several potential products that will be based on what we do. And hopefully in the next several months, we'll also have some new R&D results, including the reasoning space. So stay tuned for that. Follow either Pleias on LinkedIn or on Twitter. We'll announce those things there.
I guess there are no more questions. Let's just wait a few seconds. Amazing. Oh, thank you so much, Ivan. It was great as usual. I mean, like, you're the man, definitely. And
had my fun, and I think the questions were very good. I have to I have to say that out of webinars I participate, this was by far the best audience. A lot of activity, great questions. So thank you, Kevin, for running this thing. Apparently, you managed to have very good level of people online. That's really unique.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the hour you spent with the audience. And we are going to, of course, the replay is going to be available, and we are going to repurpose a lot of small bits here and there to actually spread the word about what you actually shared with us today. Amazing. So thank you so much. And this is the end of the live. And I guess we see you not next week. I think it's going to be 15 days for a new episode. Bye.